jump into the message, I'd like to read the text Laurence Turner will be speaking on, Matthew 5:33-37 from the English Standard Version Bible. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil.
I was just 17 years old, and I was passing by the law courts in my hometown when the doors suddenly burst open and a man came running out with a complete look of joy on his face. And as I walked on, out of the corner of my eye, I could see that he was making a beeline straight for me. And he came right up to me and stood right in front of me, and he said, "Young man, I've just got to tell you something." And what do you think he had to say? Had he been in court and seen an unrepentant criminal receive his just deserts? Or had he just witnessed justice being done for the poor and weak? No. He said, "I've just been in court, and I've told a pack of lies, and they believed me. If I'd told the truth, I'd be off to prison right now." Now, to this day, I have no idea what possessed this fellow, this stranger, to confide that to me, a teenager just passing by on the street. But I remember standing there just stunned. When this man went into court to give evidence, he took an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But he told a pack of lies and walked out a free man. Now, of course, if I'd had my wits about me, I suppose I could have quoted the words of Jesus that we've just read, where Jesus talks about our oaths should be yes or no. But somehow I don't think that would have made much impression on this fellow. But these words of Jesus have far more significance than simply advice to us when we are giving evidence in a court of law. And an easy way to see that, I think, is to ask this simple question. Out of all the issues Jesus could have included in his Sermon on the Mount, why does he bother to take time on the matter of taking oaths? Well, I think the answer is probably this, that in the time of Jesus, it was possible to take an oath and to give the impression that you were a person of integrity, that your word was your bond, as stated in your oath. But you could be lying through your teeth, just like that fellow who met me on the road. And it worked like this. There were basically two types of oaths. There were oaths that were really binding, and there were oaths that were, well, not really binding. In order for an oath to be binding, you had to mention the name of God. And that's the reason why many shysters would take oaths and get as close as possible to mentioning God, but never quite getting there. And if the oath they had taken did not mention God, then if push came to shove, that oath was not binding. And that's the reason why some people would get around this and they would say, "I will swear by heaven above, or by earth below, or by the city of Jerusalem, or by my head," meaning may I lose my head, anything to avoid simple, plain, honest integrity. And Jesus said, don't swear by heaven above, or by earth below, or by Jerusalem, or by your head. Don't wriggle out of the responsibility of transparent integrity in what you do. Don't swear by heaven above, because that's God's throne. The earth below is God's footstool. Jerusalem is God's city. And as far as your head is concerned, God has determined the hairs, or the lack thereof, which lie upon it. Because all of life is lived in the presence of God. So, Jesus says, let's get rid of oaths altogether. If we are people of integrity, all that's needed is for us to say yes or no. That's all that's needed. And of all the hard sayings of Jesus, this may turn out to be one of the hardest, because transparent integrity is a rare commodity in this world. In 1986, a retired British intelligence officer called Peter Wright was taken to court by the British government. Mr. Wright wanted to publish his memoirs, but those memoirs, if published, would prove exceedingly embarrassing to the government. And under cross-examination, the most senior British civil servant, the Cabinet Secretary, no less, Sir Robert Armstrong, began to sweat. It was put to him that the government had fostered a misleading impression which amounted to an outright lie. Sir Robert responded quite vigorously, using a turn of phrase which has since become legendary. He said, "Her Majesty's government did not lie. Who in the world could ever imagine that Her Majesty's government would tell a lie? Of course not. But in this particular case, it might, shall we say, have been economical with the truth." Economical with the truth. It's those kind of weasel words that Jesus has in his sights. And the Apostle James also takes aim at those of us who think that we can make a distinction between our words, which need to be true, and words where we can be economical with the truth. He says this in James chapter 5, verse 12. He says, "Above all, my beloved, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation." Anyone who can give that kind of yes and no can be trusted. The problem is that the world is full of liars and their lies. Who can you trust? In fact, there's an entire science devoted to this, a science devoted to deciding whether the person looking you right in the eye is a person of integrity or not. It's quite a complex art, this. You have to take into account their facial expressions, their eye movements, the way they nod their head, the frequency of their breathing, speaking, swallowing. If you can get in close enough, measure their perspiration, and about 24 other indicators. And after taking all of that into consideration, you might have an idea as to whether this person is telling the truth or not. But you can never be absolutely certain. Alex Gibney produced the documentary The Armstrong Lie, about the notorious cyclist. And Alex Gibney said, "I've never met a better liar than Lance Armstrong. And I've met a bunch. No, he's good. The best." If lack of integrity were an Olympic event, there'd be no lack of top performers. And so the reason, this is the common logic that we have. A, because there is a lack of integrity in the world, it means that B, we must take oaths in order to show that we are genuine. But that is not Christ's logic. Christ's logic is this. A, because there is a lack of integrity in the world, it means that B, we should get rid of oaths altogether. The solution to the problem is C, live lives of such transparent integrity that there's no need to take oaths. And Jesus is a radical on this point. As far as we know, he was the first person ever to suggest, let's get rid of oaths. And my radical idea is, be honest. Now, as we all know, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is at pains at times to show the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. So we've got to be careful not to fall into the same trap here, that we set about to fulfill the letter of what Jesus has to say and forget the spirit of what he was really talking about. The letter of what he has to say, don't take oaths, well, that doesn't take much effort, does it? I mean, just don't do it. But the spirit of what he has to say, live lives of such transparent integrity that whatever you say, whenever you say it, whatever you do, wherever it is, people know they can trust you. Now that is a challenge. About 3 or 4 months ago, Mr. Jonathan Burrows was stopped at a railway station in London. It appeared that Mr. Burrows had avoided paying his train fare. Now, of course, not paying your train fare is a misdemeanor. So he was called over for some further explanation as to why he had not paid his fare of £21.50, about $30. And after further questioning and consulting their electronic records, it became apparent that Mr. Burrows had made a habit of not paying his fare. A very long habit, as it transpired. In fact, they calculated more or less that he had avoided paying £42,550, about $65,000 in train fares. He'd been a very naughty boy. And he had traveled for years on that train, blithely avoiding paying the fare as he traveled into his work in the city of London. He worked in the financial services sector. He was a banker. Did you notice there my use of the past tense? For Mr. Burrows is no longer a banker. The Financial Conduct Authority investigated his case and they concluded, I quote, that Mr. Burrows has demonstrated a lack of honesty and integrity. They banned him for life from working in any financial industry. And some of us might say, come on, it was only a few train fares. But that's the point, isn't it? It's in that very sort of thing, in the mundane realities of everyday life, that our integrity is formed. If we can't show integrity in the ordinary, everyday occurrences of our everyday lives, we're not going to show it in more important matters. And every one of us, at some stage or another, faces a crisis. And often that crisis is, when the chips are down, I've got to make a choice. And the choice is between plain honesty, plain integrity, or being economical with the truth. And when we are faced with that choice, there is no time for integrity to be formed. Because integrity is not formed in a crisis. It is revealed in a crisis. The place where integrity is formed are in those small decisions we make every day of our lives, in our families, in our churches, in our relationships. As in, excuse me, Mr. Burrows, but have you paid your train fare, sir? And Jesus says that our yes should be yes, our no should be no, plain and simple. But what Jesus has to say also suggests to me how we might respond to our brothers and sisters who disagree with us on some points. Now, I don't know whether you have noticed this, but in the Adventist Church, not everything is sweetness and light, shall we say. And a few weeks ago, I Googled The One Project. And I must confess, having agreed to come here and speak, that I was surprised by the results. I mean, do you know that there are those in our community who think that the One Project, and I quote here just to be certain, that the One Project sows the seeds of uncertainty, that it teaches pantheism, that it mocks the Adventist Church. And on one site I got to, I discovered that it is guilty of such salacious immorality. I just blushed when I read it. Now, of course, the temptation here is to repay those kinds of insults in kind. And then we question the motivation of people like that, maybe even question their sanity, and concoct conspiracy theories which lead us inevitably to the highest echelons of the general conference structure. No, says Jesus, no, let's keep this simple. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. And we don't demonstrate our integrity by assassinating the characters of those who disagree with us. Plain, simple integrity, says Jesus. That's what Jesus demands, and that's what he demonstrates. Because Christ's yes was yes. His no was no. As the Apostle Paul puts it in 2 Corinthians, he said, "Do I make my plans according to ordinary human standards, ready to say yes, yes, and no, no at the same time? As surely as God is faithful, our word to you has not been yes and no. For the Son of God, Jesus Christ, whom we proclaimed among you, Silvanus and Timothy and I, was not yes and no, but in him it is always yes. For in him, every one of God's promises is a yes." Thank you for the applause, but I didn't write that. No. In other words, Paul says, I have been a man of integrity. I haven't kept you guessing. I haven't used evasive words. I haven't used deliberately ambiguous language. I haven't been yes and no at the same time. Take your pick. In just the same way, Christ is not yes and no at the same time. When it comes to salvation, Christ is definitely and transparently yes. It isn't that, yes, today you have salvation in Christ, and tomorrow, surprise, surprise, no, you don't. No, for in him, every one of God's promises is a yes. And that is why our yes must be yes. Our no must be no. In everything we do, in everything that we say, let us imitate our Lord Jesus Christ himself. Let us be people of integrity.
Laurence notes that not taking oaths in the name of God is the easy part. However, the spirit of Jesus' command is the real challenge, asking us to live lives of transparent integrity in which our words and actions are completely reliable. What is the challenge to living like this? Laurence reminds us of the words in the Sermon on the Mount and other texts which advise us to make our yeses be yes and our nos be no. Describe a situation you have encountered when your yes or no has been compromised. Are there certain situations that test your integrity on an ongoing basis? If you'd like more information on the One Project, or you would enjoy watching one of these presentations again, please visit them at www.theoneproject.org. That's www.oneproject.org. If you were moved by this presentation, we would invite you to experience a One Project gathering in person. The upcoming gatherings are listed on the website. Be blessed until we meet again.